The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back with another week of podcasting excellence on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. It is another episode of Music Weekly on the Nerdcast Empire. And this is the first Music Weekly that will cover music from 2025. So it's going to be time to dive into a new year's worth of music, and we've got some good music for you from the weeks of January the 3rd and January the 10th, 2025. We'll be picking 4 new albums that you need to check out, and of course we'll go into the vault in the last segment of the show. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It is going pretty well. Excited to be into 2025 music-wise. 2024 was, looking back on it, a really good year as far as new releases go, so we know the year starts out slowly, so we had to group together a couple weeks to kind of give us a decent amount of music to digest, but I think we found some good ones.
Yeah, for sure, and good time to remind you while I post the link in the chat, make sure you join our Discord so you can keep up to date on when and where we'll be broadcasting, because we're going to be streaming a lot in 2025. At least that is the plan as it stands now. We'll get into that a little bit before we get into the news items this week. As you see on the screen, even if you are watching on Twitch or YouTube, obviously if you're listening on your favorite podcast network, you can't see it on the screen. But for those of you who maybe can't see it, schedule's going to change a little bit starting this week. On Mondays and Fridays, we're going to have the Nerdcast News Report that is going to be about a 20-minute or so, to try to keep it around 20 minutes, news update, where we're going to have one big story, a couple of smaller stories, and then kind of some rapid-fire news at the end. It'll be something we can get out there on Mondays and Fridays, so you kind of keep up to date on what is the latest in news and all the things that we do. And it's also something that if breaking news happens during the week, we can jump on and do really at any time. But you're going to expect to see it on Mondays and Fridays, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Our anime podcast, which was on Thursdays, now going to back up a day. It's going to be Anime Wednesdays, and it'll be 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. That is 22:30 JST. So if you are listening overseas, that you can kind of figure those times out. But that'll be our anime podcast, and it'll be more kind of focused anime. I'm thinking this week we're going to do another music episode where we pick some songs that you need to check out. That's kind of the plan for this Wednesday. And then on Sunday, as always, right here, right now, it'll be Music Weekly, 7 p.m. Eastern, then, of course, midnight GMT. If you are over in Europe, you can use that to figure out what time we are on. Since we pick a lot of European bands, I figure it's probably best to mention that as well. And, of course, that's Monday, midnight, for those of you in the future. Welcome. It's still Music Mondays to all of you out in Europe and in Asia. For us, it is our Music Weekly show on Sundays, and again, we've got a lot of stuff to go over, so we're going to get started with some news, and unfortunately, I have to start out with some sad news in the music world, the news that John Sykes has passed away, supposedly in the end of 2024. It was not announced until, I believe, last Monday on the 20th of January, but according to obituary or notice on the website, it listed him as passing in 2024. So, happened a couple of weeks ago, it appears. Battle with cancer, according to his social media page. John Sykes, probably best known as a member of Whitesnake, Thin Lizzy, and Tigers of Pantang. Also fronted the hard rock group Blue Murder, released several solo albums. He was 65 years old. And as we kind of look a little bit into his life and his, everything he did as far as the music world, influenced a lot of people. Certainly his time in Whitesnake and unfortunate falling out is something that probably a lot of people do remember as far as, kind of what his involvement with that band was. But still, obviously, terrible news, but a guy whose impact in the music world is going to be remembered for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And in a way, it's not too surprising that the news was kind of slow to get out, because I was always under the impression that he was a fairly elusive guy. Like, when he wants to be around, he was around. When he didn't, he didn't. There were instances throughout his career where he was rumored to be a part of different bands and acts, and then it would fall through. Obviously, the issue with Whitesnake, where they had recorded an entire album, and then David Coverdale fired the entire band. But But that being said, I saw another article from GuitarPlayer.com that references some statements made by Steve Vai and Marty Friedman, obviously two giants in the heavy guitar world. Steve Vai basically saying, his thumbprint is an indelible part of the Whitesnake record he did. The fatness of the record and the rock integrity it had was all Sykes. So I knew I wasn't going to sound like Sykes, and I wasn't going to try to. You cheat yourself when you try to do that and play like someone else, and the audience is a lot smarter than you think. Marty Friedman, a guest on Trunk Nation with Eddie Trunk, made the statement that he thought John Sykes was the first guy as a lead guitarist who was just playing mind-boggling guitar in that context. At the time, it was really cool rhythms, and the solos were just kind of your basic regular solos. But when Sykes came out on Tiger's Spellbound album, it was a game changer for him. Obviously, Marty Friedman was kind of a guy raised on some of that new wave of British heavy metal, and that was really, really influential on him. So, yeah, there's no doubt that this guy left a huge mark in the world of hard rock. I wasn't really familiar with him as part of Whitesnake. Like, that was a band that I had their greatest hits, and that was really about it. The first time I ran into him was I actually bought the Blue Murder album, the first one, at a consignment shop not too far from here. And I think what caught my attention was that I saw that Bob Rock produced it. Like, oh, so this must be a big deal. And yeah, the album was amazing. And come to find out, that was the band he started after getting kicked out of Whitesnake. But just a super amazing, just critically acclaimed album that unfortunately didn't see much commercial success, possibly due to lack of real promotion. But definitely worth checking out if you're interested in his work and just really good hard rock music.
Wikipedia article mentions he was listed as one of the 100 greatest heavy metal guitarists of all time in Guitar World. Also included in Guitar Player's list of the 50 unsung heroes of the guitar. And you can see why. I mean, he's influenced so many virtuosos. Michael Sweet also listed on the Wikipedia page as someone who was influenced by Sykes. And, it's certainly sad to see, and unfortunately we're losing more of these guys as we go. It's kind of the nature of it, unfortunately. Obviously, he passed before his time because of cancer, but just a true legend of the business and someone who will certainly be missed. And good time to maybe check out some of his work if you get a chance and appreciate what he has left behind to the music industry. But unfortunately, passing away at the end of 2024. Kind of jump ahead to a little bit of a brighter story. We're going to talk a little bit about some streaming numbers. I guess it's brighter in the fact that nobody's dying in this story, but it's not exactly Not quickly. It's not exactly the best news. Really good piece by Metal Injection. They were able to take the data provided in Illuminate's 2024 year-end music report, which we have, and we're going to kind of go through at some point and maybe do a little bit more content in relation to it. And the data that they pulled out saying that roughly 99,000 songs are uploaded to streaming services daily, or about 2.77 million songs per month. And this is down a little bit from 2023 when about 103,000 songs were uploaded every day, but just an insane amount of music. Roughly 202 million separate tracks available on streaming services at the end of 2024, up from 184 million in 2023. But this is where it gets dark. Of the 202 million songs on streaming services, 93.2 million were played a maximum of 10 times. Given the Spotify's policy of not paying out royalties for any track that gets below 1,000 streams per year, that automatically means that 93.2 million songs were providing free labor.
And it gets worse.
And continue on, because obviously it does get worse as this goes on.
Like you mentioned, those songs not being played more than 10 times, but you also mentioned that if it doesn't exceed 1,000 streams, there's no royalty payout. So when you look at how many songs failed to meet 1,000 streams, that number jumps to 175.5 million songs. So that's 86.88% of all the Spotify music that's just out there and not generating revenue.
Yeah, 95% or thereabouts of artists on Spotify have less than 1,000 monthly listeners. So it's, not... I mean, on the one hand, it's not surprising because, as we've talked about it, and this is data to kind of back up the things that we have discussed on this podcast, if you're a band that's looking to make a living by just digital downloads and streams, you can't. It's not possible. You're not. It's a hobby if you're doing that, because you're not going to make very much money off of that. You have to sell merch. You have to sell physical releases through your Bandcamp or wherever, because it's the only shot you have. You have to tour and hope that you can tour as cheaply as possible, so that you can actually make money off of those tours and obviously expand your fan base in the process. But it's one of those things that people don't want to admit, that some of those early artists that kind of stuck their neck out against these streaming services, against, downloads of music, they were trying to prevent this. And of course, when it's, Lars Ulrich,
or Dr. Dre,
or Dr.
Eminem,
people look at it as, well, they've
earned enough money. They don't deserve it anymore.
They don't deserve any more. That you don't need a third yacht. Like, they've already got it. But what they were really doing is being the voice for the people who can't get in front of the press and make headlines by making those statements, because the 175.5 million that are not meeting that threshold, nobody's going to care if they come out and release a press release like, please stop listening to our stuff on Spotify, please buy the albums.
I mean, the reality is their motivations could have been greed, but that doesn't make them wrong.
Right.
Because not only are you talking about up-and-coming acts that are struggling to make money, but what about those bands that were just kind of on the fringe, that were doing all right for maybe a small period of time, but are now just trying to hang on?
Yeah.
They didn't have that multi-platinum album or numerous multi-platinum album. They probably had perhaps one go gold or something in the mid-90s, and they're not out there making a killing, but they deserve more than what they're getting via the streaming services.
Yeah, which in a lot of cases is nothing, and that's really what's crazy about it. And I think the other crazy thing, too, is the record labels don't care. Like, they're getting theirs first and foremost.
Yeah.
Their CEO's got a third yacht. It's completely okay. And their big artists are taken care of. The ones that might speak up for these small artists, the labels are like, Metallica's getting their royalties. We're good. Like, we don't really care about the small ones. And to some degree, like, kudos to some of these labels that we talk about each and every week, because you can tell that they're out there really trying for these small artists. I get dozens of PR emails every week for these small bands. Like,
shout out to Reigning Phoenix and Inverse Records. I mean, they're all
on
over
it.
The place.
Absolutely. And they're trying to allow these small artists to grow and get bigger, and doing everything they can to help keep them going, because that it's an uphill fight, and there's just way too much talent in the music industry to see some of these bands and artists just stop making music because they can't make any money at it. So it's
bad too, because there was a time where you thought the industry was unfair because of the people programming your local radio stations.
Yeah.
But now that's gone, and it's an algorithm. It's actually somehow less fair than programming directors on radio.
Yeah, because now that isn't even a concern, because...
And those radio stations weren't going to just randomly play some fake AI music creation.
And no, they weren't. And that's a good point. Like, at least they were playing real music. But, the radio industry died the day that they allowed for these conglomerates like, iHeartRadio, was Clear Channel at the time, back in the early 2000s, to buy it. Because it used to be you were not allowed to have so many stations in the same market. So you had mom and pop radio station owners. Yeah. So you had some diversity. You had the ability to get different kinds of music. Like, you could have a heavy metal station that maybe played some of the stuff that we listen to every week. But once that law went into effect and they allowed these big conglomerate entities to buy all the stations in the same market.
Was that one?
Cumulus was one as well. Still is one. Then, number one, all your mom and pop stations got driven out of business. So now every city you go into, there is a mixed channel, there is a classic rock channel, there is a little harder classic rock channel,
all programmed by the same overlord. in the central office.
And some cases recorded and voiced by DJs in a central office that are going out to multiple cities. You don't even have DJs in your local city anymore. It's just somebody in an office in somewhere outside of Cincinnati sitting
you might have like your morning guy.
Yeah, maybe.
Your morning show.
Yeah. I mean, I just saw a story, and this was television. I know we're getting a little far off the track, but a local TV market where they fired a couple of their anchors, and they're going to have some national news basically do local news for their local TV stations. These anchors have been there for like 50 years or something like that, and people in town loved them and all this other stuff, but they made too much money, so out they go. And so it's just, I mean, it's not good, and it's killed the radio industry as far as any kind of driver for these type of bands that are clearly not making money off of streaming. Like, any hope to get on the local radio is dead, because you're not going to get through iHeart, you're not going to get through Cumulus. So what's the option? You're going to have to try to grind it out on Bandcamp and hope that podcasts like ours find out about you, and maybe, and like I said, our podcast is still too small to really do a dent. But we're hoping a little bit at a time,
That's the goal.
Try to, grow our podcast and continue to shout out that this great music's out there and that you should buy it and support it. And
you take it personally to some degree when you discover some of these bands that are on their fourth, fifth, however many albums, that there wasn't that infrastructure around to introduce you to those bands sooner.
Absolutely. I was stunned in 2024 how many great bands, great albums we listened to. And it's like, why have I never heard of this band?
Yeah.
Some of them have been around for 20 or 30 years. Yeah. And you'll be like, well, I kind of heard of them at some point, because like you're far more in touch with music than I am. And I'll be like, well, I never heard of them. And it's, and I'm sure some of our listeners haven't either. So it
takes legwork.
It does.
It's not just going to be thrown at you anymore.
So our goal is that you can come to us, and we're going to do some of that legwork for you, and you can check out these awesome bands. But again, when it comes to streaming, they're not helping anybody out except for the people that probably don't need the help. So something to keep in mind. Really appreciate that write-up by Metal Injection. We'll dig more into the stats from Luminate's report and see if we can.
You can find out how many cassettes sold in 2024.
Yeah, that's still a stunning number, to be honest with you. But
bringing it back.
For some people, it never went away. But let's end on a little bit more of a pleasant story, because those first two were certainly a little bit down. But we're going to talk some Undead Elvis, and specifically. If you would like a rotting Elvis around your house, you now can do that. You can have that. Gwar, one of Mike's favorite bands, one he's talked about a lot on this podcast, has their Undead Elvis prop used from their 1999 tour up for auction on their website. It's currently going for $12,000. If you got a little bit of extra cash laying around, you want to bid. Only been 4 bids. It started at $800. So clearly, like, somebody wants this Elvis.
Or they accidentally threw in an extra zero into what was supposed to be a $1,200 bid.
Perhaps. But I'll let you kind of get into the history of this, because obviously, you being a Gwar fan, you certainly have a little more perspective on this, but still kind of an interesting story.
Yeah, all of their like prosthetics and suits are amazing to me. They're so ridiculous and so over the top, but they're all designed and made in-house by the band, and their slave pit kind of collective they have built that's been part of Gwar ever since their inception. But like this one itself, the mask was sculpted by Don Draculich and Matt McGuire. Those are two guys familiar to the Gwar universe. Don playing Sleazy P. Martini, just a legendary character, and Matt McGuire playing Sawborg Destructo, who's been more prevalent in the last like 15 years or so with their albums. But yeah, they do all this stuff themselves. It's like you look at the picture of it and you see where it has like his entrails that go into the suit. That way when they rip him apart, that stuff flies out. You can kind of see the hoses that are built into it, where whatever fluid's going to shoot out of him is basically going to emanate from. But yeah, it's an amazing thing. And Gwar is a band that if you've never seen them live, even now with the members fluctuating as they have, you still have to see them. It's an event, and not only are you going to see a ridiculous show, but you're probably going to come away with more appreciation for their music than you thought you could have had.
Yeah, I mean, give them a lot of credit. They figured this gimmick out, if you will, and have been able to, take, skills, as you told me earlier, that were basically about, doing theater. It wasn't about doing
like they wanted to do some sort of horror movie together.
So, like, a lot of the skills they acquired to probably create these things were strictly based out of the theater world, which, I mean, makes a lot of sense when you look at this stuff. And it turns out the music actually drew more people in. So that ended up veering their career course where they went from, you know, hey, we're going to do theater and have some really good music with it to, hey, we're going to take the concept of this play that we were thinking about and basically make our whole band completely around it, which is... It's kind of crazy, honestly.
Yeah, evidently they were all kind of rehearsing in the same like old like warehouse or something, and that's how they kind of started getting together and working together. And it's been that way ever since. You know, I didn't really get into them until probably the early 2000s. I was aware of them before mainly because they would periodically show up in news stories on MTV or show up on Jerry Springer's show and just all sorts of nonsense like that only kind of fed the mystique of what they were. They were kind of the point of emphasis in the Beavis and Butthead video game where your main goal was to get to the Gwar concert. But yeah, just totally underrated metal band. And this, you know, I'm not going to pay $12,000 for a dead Elvis suit, but it would be pretty cool to have some of their props from over the years.
For sure. And then maybe they'll look at selling more of those props as the years go on, as fans want to get their piece of Gwar if they didn't leave with a bunch of random fluids all over them after the show as well. So, yeah, definitely check those guys out, continuing to tour even today. And if you have a, you know, mid 5 figures laying around, you would like an Undead Elvis, because my guess is if that 12,000 bid is a legit, my guess is the next time that gets overbid, somebody's going to jump it again. So clearly somebody wants Elvis. We'll see. I think the auction
Does
ends
that possibly draw in Elvis fans?
Could. You just never know. Those people are crazy too. So January 29th, I believe, is the last day for that auction. So you need to move quickly if you are wanting some Undead Elvis in your life. But that is going to wrap up our news segment for this week. Just a reminder, check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. Check out our Twitch page. That's where we are right now, live on twitch.tv/nerdcastempire. Of course, we have our podcast archived on YouTube and on your favorite podcast source. Again, new format. We'll be doing news Mondays and Fridays, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, right here on Twitch. Anime Wednesdays, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Musics will stay on Music Sundays. Obviously, there will be times where that shuffles around. We'll try to let you know in advance whenever that happens. Also, if all the technology works and the fingers are crossed, and we'll see how it works, the plan is to do a live stream next Saturday, or this Saturday now, I guess, technically, for the Royal Rumble. That is a 6 o'clock Eastern start. I would think we would be on the air probably a little before that to do a little bit of a preview. And then if you're not with us live and you're not on the VOD or whatever it may be, I will piece together kind of a post Royal Rumble podcast that will come out of that as well if you just want our reaction to the matches and whatever might happen. So we're going to test all that this week. Think everything will work out. We'll definitely let you know for sure, but I plan on that on Saturday. So we're going to be along a lot this week, so make sure you check us out wherever you check us out at. So it's time to get to new music, and that reminds me I need to paste in a couple of playlists. So as mentioned, this is one of the rare weeks where we are looking at 2 different weeks worth of releases, and the reason why, and you'll be able to tell if you go to click on these playlists, is the week of January the 3rd was not very big. It was pretty small. So because of that, we were not going to be able... Why is that not pasting in? There we go. We were not able to just take 1 week and review it, because it would have been been really hard the last couple of weeks of new music to find enough good bands and albums to share with you all. So we've decided for the first 2 weeks of 2025, we're combining in January 3rd and January the 10th releases. Both playlists are available there. If you're watching on the YouTube video, you're going to see a link to his playlist on the 10th. If you want to see the playlist on the 3rd, all you have to do is click on his name, go to playlists. You'll see the date for the 3rd. You can check out all of our previous playlists on his channel as well. So definitely check that out. But we go through all that stuff. Mike goes through every single song. Then we will basically pick 2 of our favorites to share with you. And and we will do that today here as always. And there was some good music to get things started for 2025. Again, the playlists were a little thin. I would expect the week of the 17th we'll see a little bit healthier playlist as things kind of ramp back up as we get 2025 underway, but we still were able to pick a couple of bands each and a couple of albums to share with you. With that said, it's time to go to Mike and time to get your first of 2 picks as we get into 2025.
Yeah, for sure. The 17th should be not huge, but
Closer.
Certainly as large as the 3rd and the 10th combined at the very least.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, that's something, if nothing else. But yeah, there was actually some decent stuff this week, or the 3rd and the 10th, so definitely had a chance to pick a couple good ones. My first one is kind of odd to start the year with death metal, but that's kind of what we're going to do. Or wait, am I going to do the other one first?
Yeah, the alphabetically.
Okay, so my second pick, they have a little bit of death metal, but not nearly as much as my first pick. But we're going to start off with the 3rd full-length album from the Italy-based progressive metal band. The band is Beriedir, and the album is Liminal Spaces.
Yeah, we'll save the death metal for a second. This was a really solid album. I got to listen to this one all the way front to back, and definitely some different sounds in this album, but I thought overall it was really good.
Yeah, for sure. This band was formed in 2015 by 2 former members of the melodic death metal band Chaos Edge, Stefano Nasperli and Alessandro Manini. The band now consists of Nasperli on vocals and keyboards, along with Simone Bacci-Moten on guitars and backing vocals, Francesco Ideo on lead guitars, Daniele Contaboni on bass, and Ciro Salvi on drums. It starts out like a pretty straightforward album. It's got some synthy keyboards going on, heavy riffs, blend of clean and harsh vocals. Pretty reasonably enjoyable stuff. Once you get to the track In the Corner of My Eyes, that's when it gets a little less predictable, and then the music just starts kind of getting very proggy, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. Let me pull up their album really quick so I can see it in front of me. Let's see. Not doing anything crazy. Yeah, so like that track, As Tight as the Phantoms Hold, and 5 are all just very progressive, but really cool. Contrasting it with my other pick, it's interesting because my other pick is a very straightforward, you know what you're getting every song for the most part, not a whole lot of variety, whereas with this one, it's definitely more ambitious. It's you have some of the tracks that are kind of fairly melodic, metal, Halo, Neon, the proggy stuff, In the Corner of My Eyes, As Tight as Phantoms Hold, 5. Then there's a track, More Than Starlight, which feels like a symphonic metal track, has a guest appearance from Nadia Sampellegrini. But yeah, it's 10 tracks, very easy to listen to, and a lot there to really get a hold of. Standout tracks on the album include Neon, In the Corner of My Eyes, 5, Anamoya, and the track that I picked to listen to, the first track on the album, Halo.
And a reminder, if you're listening on your favorite podcast network, you already know the drill, but again, you're only going to hear the music on Twitch or YouTube. So if you're listening on your favorite podcast network, we're going to jump to the other side of this track now. We will now listen to this track, Beriedir, with the album Liminal Spaces. This is the opening track off that album, Halo. So let's listen to a little bit of that now. But yeah, this was one that was an interesting listen, and like you said, of the 4 albums we have this week, this was the one that definitely went in different directions. It wasn't just the same thing. Not to say the other 3 are all just the same thing for every track, but it was much more outside the box on some of the stuff. That clearly they have some different visions on what they want this album to sound like, and they pulled them off, which is really impressive. That even the stuff that sounds different is still enjoyable to listen to, which I think is really good. But it's kind of funny you have the track Halo, and then we're going to talk about a band that's going to, I guess, tell you how you dealt with the track Halo potentially in your second choice.
I didn't even really consider that at the time, but yeah, that's pretty weird. One thing I did forget to mention, I didn't take a note of it on the Metal Archives. They point out that the name of the band, Beriedir, however you say that, is the term for guardian in Sindarin, which is the Elvish language from J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth.
Okay.
I'm not super well versed on Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, so unfortunately I was not aware of that, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's definitely different. I was expecting it to be, it almost seems like some sort of like old Irish or something like that.
Yeah.
Or maybe a Scandinavian
And I don't really
language.
know what his Elvish language is even like based on, or what the inspiration for it was.
Yeah.
But that there could certainly be some parallels there if I had to guess.
For sure. But yeah, I really enjoyed that album. Really good stuff from Beriedir. Definitely check out Liminal Spaces, their album, and Mike's second pick that we did first this week. But now we're going to move on to your first pick, which we're going to talk about second.
Yes.
And like I said, talk about Halo. Now we're gonna talk about Halo again.
Yeah, so this one, not one I was expecting just based on the personnel involved. I feel like the singer of this band has been extremely busy lately, but my next pick is the second album from the Swedish melodic death metal band. The band is The Halo Effect, and the album is March of the Unheard.
Yeah, I knew this had a pretty strong chance of getting picked just listening to a couple tracks that I got to listen to. It's got a great sound, and yeah, I think a little more straightforward than the other one, but I don't mean that in a bad way. I think it's what you get is really, really good stuff.
Yeah, it definitely has that classic Swedish melodic death vibe to it. Like that was what they were going for, and not too surprising considering this band was formed in 2019 from 5 former members of In Flames. The members include the founder of In Flames, Jesper Stromblad on guitar, Michael Stahn on vocals, who we've talked about a lot, seemingly. He is the current singer of Dark Tranquillity, also the original early singer of In Flames. He's been busy. He has, obviously, this album released on January 10th. Back in October, he had his kind of gothic rock band, Cemetery Skyline, who released an album. Then back in August, Dark Tranquillity released End Time Signals. So, just in a time frame of like 5 months, we have 3 CDs from this guy.
He's clearly staying busy for a reason because he's really good at what he does.
Yeah, I mean, as far as death metal vocals, that guy, and even the clean vocals, he's really good at those too, as it turns out. The remainder of the band includes Nicholas Engelin on guitars, Peter Ewers on bass, and Daniel Svensson on drums, all former In Flames members who've spent a good amount of time in the band. Yeah, so the Angry Metal guy likens this to kind of the fiction / We Are the Void era of Dark Tranquillity meets the Horacle era of In Flames. I'm not super familiar with either eras of those bands, admittingly. Really, last year was the first time I ever sat down and gave Dark Tranquillity a fair shake, which I really, really enjoyed End Time Signals. As far as In Flames go, I'm kind of more familiar with the Come Clarity era of the band, kind of the mid-2000s, so stuff kind of before that is out of my range up to this point, but, it's not a bad thing. Angry Metal guys seem to talk it up like this was a positive. If you don't mind the death vocals and enjoy kind of melody and good songwriting, this stuff, you're going to enjoy it. Like, the thing about that Swedish death metal sound is that they write really good, catchy riffs and hooks. You just got to be okay with the vocals. And I think Stan is a guy that can deliver good, harsh vocals. And we review a lot of music each week, and not everybody can do that. There's certainly an art form to it, and he has over decades mastered that.
Yeah, we've heard a lot of bad in that genre over almost every week. There's several examples, so it does make the stuff that's well done really stand out when you hear so much of the stuff that is not.
And it makes you wonder too, and I think I've pondered this before and maybe even mentioned it on the podcast. I wonder if the people who are good at doing the harsh vocals just so happen to be really good singing too. Like, you can do the clean vocals, so you can also do the non-clean vocals. I think of the original lead singer from Scar Symmetry. That guy is phenomenal at both. And here we have, in this case too, there's got to be a connection there where if you can sing, you can also probably kind of growl.
Yeah, I would think there's at least some correlation there.
So standout tracks on this album include Conspire to Deceive, Cruel Perception, March of the Unheard, Forever Astray, A Death That Becomes Us, and the track that I picked to check out, the song Detonate.
So let's check this out. This is the Halo Effect, their new album, March of the Unheard. This is the second track off of that album, Detonate. Let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Will take us, the forces that are running us down. No equilibrium would talk of war. Where emotions will take us there, where emotions will load us back with equal force in equal measure. We just go so right.
Yeah, again, I mean, I think we've established on this podcast that type of music is not necessarily something I listen to a lot. It's definitely something that you're more into than I am. But I do think I know enough to know when it's good and when it's bad. And this is good. Like, it's clearly well done. The music obviously complements it. It doesn't. I think when it's bad, more often than not, the music comes across as noise. It's almost like the music is competing with the growling vocals to see like which can be more grating. I think if you're going to have a song with growling vocals, it's important to have music that supports it by being melodic, by being something that you could hear clean vocals over and it would make a lot of sense. And I think that's where so many of these bands that we hear every week get it wrong, where it's like, oh, well, we're doing growling vocals. Now I have to, we have to have drum sounds that just sound like just, Saint Anger times 10,
It's almost like the guitars can provide that clean sound.
The melody that is not there from the singer because you can't, otherwise they're battling with each other. I mean, it's just a constant war on your ears. And this is not that. This is clearly a good balance between those sounds of the vocalist and the music behind it. And, not surprised that it was a good album. Again, there's just too many talented people involved in this project for it not to be good. So I think people that were fans or are fans of In Flames, I think you're going to find a lot of your familiar faces here that are putting out what is a really good album at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
But that is the Halo Effect, March of the Unheard. Check those guys out. That is Mike's second pick for this week. I've got two picks, as always, as well. And we're going to start off with an EP to start 2025. This is the heavy doom metal band from Connecticut, formed in 2017. This is Mourn The Light with The Magic Is Calling EP. Got a couple of American bands for my first two picks of 2025. I'm sure that won't keep up as the year goes on, but a couple good ones. This is their fourth EP to go along with one full-length album from 2021. Notable this album that they have a new lead singer, Andy Small, who's been involved with Spellmaster and Oliphant. This EP was kind of set to blend their traditional doom elements with a more melodic power metal-driven sound. I think they've succeeded in that. In fact, there's still some doom elements there, but it does definitely feel brighter than potentially some of their older stuff. It also contains a cover of Black Sabbath's Headless Cross, so definitely worth checking out. They did a good job with that. In an interview with a website called breathingthecore.com, the band notes that the theme of the album is that life is full of sadness, loss, pain, and tragedy, but it can also be great, and you should always try to make the best of it. So, sounds like something a doom rock band would say, doom metal, but also trying to make the best of it. And We Are the Light. One of the tracks off this album was inspired by 80s movie soundtrack music. So
awesome.
How many bands have we covered that have some inspiration from the 80s? But just really good. It's only 4 tracks. It's 23 minutes. You definitely can just go through all 4 of them pretty quickly. You've got Blink of an Eye, We Are the Light, Headless Cross, and the opening track, which is the one we're going to listen to today, False Prophecies. So let's check these guys out. This is Mourn the Light. their latest EP, The Magic is Calling. This is the opening track off of that EP, False Prophecies. Let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Walking through the folks who dance, I cannot see far. My legs are yearning for a rest. I can't turn back, just tell me who you
But yeah, I think the combination of the new lead singer and the guitars, which are clearly they don't sound like guitars from a doom metal band. Definitely much more, much brighter sound. Definitely gives this EP a different vibe. But I think they've really kind of nailed that little bit more power metal type sound that they were going for. Mike, your thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, it's weird, but and it may not sound like a compliment, but it is one. They don't sound like an American band.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Like when you find out they're from Connecticut, you're like, that's amazing. We need more of this. We need more American acts with that. You know, you can maybe see some remnants of doom there, but yeah, otherwise very, very power metal-y, really strong vocals. Definitely a band you want to hear more from.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to see kind of where their new direction goes. So check those guys out. Mourn the Light. Their new EP is out. Definitely worth giving that a listen. We'll get to my second pick now, and we're going back to full-length albums, but staying right here in the U.S. of A. We are moving on to a heavy metal band founded in 2011. Obviously, a U.S.-based band, and founded by lead vocalist and guitarist Mark Tremonti, who's best known as the lead guitarist for Creed and Alter Bridge. This is Tremonti, his solo side project, which has now become a main project. The End Will Show Us How is the name of the album. This is the band's sixth full-length album. It's just a great hard rock album. Has some melodic moments, has some alternative sounds, has some progressive elements, but overall it really is very much straightforward rock and roll. Even got some great slow tracks as well, including the title track to the album, The End Will Show Us How, and It's Not Over. I think of the four albums we have, I think this album sounds the most polished out of all of them, which you would understand because when you're dealing with, and I think the halo effect is probably right there as well, because you have these guys who have been in the industry for a long time at very high levels. So clearly they know what they're doing when they get into the studio. Not to say the other ones don't, but it comes across as a more finished product, a more polished effort. And, take that how you will. I think some people, don't want it to be too polished with metal and rock. They think being a little more raw is better. However you want to look at it. Overall, I think it makes it just a very good listen. You can get through the whole thing, and it's just really, really well done. Standout tracks include The Mother, The Earth, and I, Just Too Much, The End Will Show Us How, and the track we're going to listen to on the podcast, One More Time. Let's listen to Tremonti, The End Will Show Us How. This is the second track off of this album, One More Time. And it was the first single off of this album. Let's listen to a little bit of it now.
The end has just begun. Carry us away. The ending starts today. One more time, yeah. Let there be one last trial. The day is coming. Will there be no survivor? Waste away in the air.
But after the chorus there, that little interlude there was definitely very interesting. And listening to it on headphones, there's definitely some interesting percussion sounds going on there. But again, just really well put together album. I think they've really done a nice job of just putting out a really solid hard rock album that people can enjoy. Your thoughts on Tremonti?
Yeah, Mark Tremonti is kind of like the late 90s Dave Grohl, where when My Own Prison came out, you just thought this is the band Creed. You didn't necessarily say, oh, that's Mark Tremonti's band. Like that, not that he didn't shine, but like you didn't really think, oh, this guy was going to go on to just eclipse the career of his original band. But I think that's where we are now. I think, when Creed kind of went away and Alter Bridge came out, they were huge. And then, now he has this act since 2012, been releasing albums under his name. And the guy's super well thought of and super talented. And just, he feels way bigger than Creed, similar to me in a way that Grohl has grown past Nirvana.
Yeah, I think so. And clearly, if you compare the sound of this album to any Creed album, like it is to me as night and day as a Foo Fighters release, like the one we talked about last week, compared to something from Nirvana. Like
Creed was very post-grunge.
Yeah.
And this is more timeless hard rock.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. There's really no datedness of it. It doesn't feel like it's a certain time or place. It's just great hard rock and a lot of different elements to it. But
and Creed was great. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, for sure.
Those first couple albums of Creed were outstanding, and I would still listen to them today. But you're taken back to a certain time when you listen to them.
For sure. And this is really something that I think could stand the test of time, if you will. Just really great stuff from Tremonti. Excited to continue to see them grow and do really cool things. But that is my second pick for this week and my second pick for 2025. It's time to go into the vaults, where Mike and I will be telling you about classic albums you need to check out. We took a break last week for our best of 2024. You are definitely getting to the end of this gimmick. I could be, just because it's getting harder to find music year in and year out. But Mike, many weeks ago, started off with going through the list of glam bands on Wikipedia, and he's gone through the alphabet, and we are now up to the letter V.
Yeah.
So we're getting toward the end of that list, and interesting to hear what your options were and what you've gone with, which is a really good album.
Yeah, I certainly had more options this week than I did the last time we visited the vault, when it was the letter U and all we had was Ugly Kid Joe. We had a good 9 different options here, and I kind of wanted to pick one that I was familiar with a song or an album, but not the entire thing. That way I could actually have some familiarity while still listening to a lot of new music. So in this case, what I ended up going with was the first album from the Dutch-American hard rock band Vandenberg. The album is called Vandenberg.
Yeah, this is this is the first time I've listened to the album all the way through today. When you told me what your pick was, I was very familiar with the hit off of this album, but the whole album is really, really solid, and kind of a shame that it didn't end up being bigger than it was.
Yeah, absolutely. So, album came out in 1982. The band formed in 1981 by the guitarist Adrian Vandenberg. He hired on to his band Bert Heerink on vocals, Dick Kemper on bass, and Joe Zoomer on drums. They recorded a demo, which caught the attention of Atlantic Records, and they were kind of off and running from there. I picked the album because I was familiar with the band Vandenberg, but not much else. Track 4 on the album, Burning Heart, is the song that I think, even if you weren't aware of music in 1982, you've probably encountered this song at some point, even if it was just from an infomercial for some sort of hard rock from the 80s compilation. I feel like it appears pretty regularly on those.
Yeah.
So yeah, that song actually reached number 39 on the Billboard Hot 100, so that was definitely kind of their big hit in their fairly short career. Beyond that, they toured with Ozzy and Kiss, had 2 subsequent albums, Heading for a Storm and Alibi. Heading for a Storm did have some chart success, but not nearly as much as the self-titled, and Alibi failed to chart at all. After that, Adrian joined Whitesnake. He had been previously offered a spot in the band by Coverdale back in the early 80s prior to Vandenberg hitting and being successful, but then he ends up joining up in 86. It's interesting that he played the solo on the song Here I Go Again, which is obviously a huge hit from Whitesnake, despite the fact that he didn't play guitar on the rest of the album. The album was actually finished with the then band members of Whitesnake that Coverdale ultimately fired afterwards. So, kind of going back to our news segment, the guitarist on that album was John Sykes. He played everything with the exception of the solo on Here I Go Again, performed by Adrian Vandenberg. So, the more you know. I had no idea.
That's crazy.
After Whitesnake broke up in 1990, he returned on several occasions and played with Coverdale more, so they definitely kind of kept that going. In 2011, he wrote a song under the Vandenberg name for his hometown Dutch football club, Twente, if that's how you say that. Former members of the band didn't approve of him using the band name without them, so a lawsuit ensued, which Adrian won, and since he has been going under the Vandenberg name since, which seems oddly fair. The band actually restarted in full in 2020 with new members. They've released 2 albums since, one titled 2020, and then another album in 2023 called Sin. This debut album has 9 tracks, and it's solid from top to bottom. It's just really good kind of early 80s blues-inspired hard rock music. If that's something that you enjoy, then there's really nothing to not like about this album. Obviously, Burning Heart's a huge track. It's still classic. It holds up, but there are other really good standout songs on the album too, including Your Love Is in Vain, Back on My Feet, Wait, Nothing to Lose. It's a quick listen. It's not a very long album. It definitely warrants a listen for people.
Yeah, I like I said, I listened to it today. It's about 37 minutes long. It was really a very easy listen. There were some tracks on there that felt very much like Whitesnake in that bluesy rock style. Yeah. There were others that were very much different, and it's just a really, really solid album, and you could certainly see the talent there. Kind of funny that looking at their Wikipedia page, like the album when they came back in 2020, entitled 2020, had Ronnie Romero singing for it, which is interesting. And then they've got a new singer now, Mats Levin, or Levin, I'm not sure exactly how that's pronounced, who has collaborated with Yngwie Malmsteen. He sang with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. So another one of these guys that has, kind of gotten around, done a lot of really cool projects.
He was in At Vance also.
Yeah. Did the EP with Candlemass.
Classic.
So yeah,
speaking of doom metal, Candlemass, they are classic.
But yeah, I mean, another guy who's really talented that's now singing with Vandenberg. They're currently, or at least fairly recently, on tour in the Netherlands, I believe. So if you are in Europe and Vandenberg is somewhere in your area, you might want to check them out. Be interesting to see kind of what set lists they're playing in 2025. But
not surprising that his guitar playing caught the attention of David Coverdale.
Yeah,
his style seems like it would totally fit. Kind of to your point, it sounds like Whitesnake.
Yeah, I think that bluesy rock sound of the early '80s that so many of those bands had. Like, he clearly had that figured out, so made a ton of sense. But yeah, definitely check out Vandenberg, their whole collection, but specifically the album Vandenberg, which was Mike's pick for the Vault this week. Many weeks ago, we started my gimmick for the Vault. We decided we were going to start with the year 1969 and go through and pick an album that was either something I really liked or was important to me. Started all the way back with the debut release of the band that would eventually be known as Chicago. The album was Chicago Transit Authority. We have gone year after year. As we've gotten into the 80s and 90s, we've also kind of taken a look at some of the other things that's come out as you start really getting to the point where there's just so much stuff. Unsurprisingly, as we've gotten into the 2000s and the 2010s, the number of albums have diminished to the point where at some point we're going to pivot to something else. But we were able to kind of keep it going this week. So 2013 is the year. I'll talk about a couple of the honorable mentions released, then I'll tell you my pick, and then we'll go to Mike for some of the things that I missed from 2013. One OK Rock had an album, Jinsei Kakete Boku, which literally means Life Times Me Equals. That came out. That was probably one of the bigger albums, Japanese albums that came out. The song The Beginning is notable off of there. Was used in the live adaptation of Rurouni Kenshin, one of the movies that came out for that. So that's probably the most well-known song off of that album. Super Collider from Megadeth came out on June the 4th, 2013. Was created or released on Tradecraft, which was a Universal label created for Dave Mustaine. When Dave Mustaine isn't handing out picks at a concert mysteriously, which that video is just wild. Still releasing music. I think this one, and we'll kind of get Mike's thoughts on it in a minute. Maybe the critics weren't as fond of this one, but there's some good stuff on this album. It's definitely worth checking out. And if you're a fan of Megadeth, we'll let Mike kind of get more into the details of that on the backside. Dream Theater's album, Dream Theater. This is it sounds like it should be their first album. It was their 12th. Came out in 2013. Good stuff, as always, from those guys. The singles include The Enemy Inside, Along for the Ride, and The Looking Glass. True North from Bad Religion. This was almost my pick, but I just picked Bad Religion recently. But this is another one that shows up on my iPod, and some good stuff on here. True North, Pass the Dead, Robin Hood in Reverse, Department of False Hope. It's 35 minutes and it's 16 tracks. Check out the whole thing. You can't go wrong there. Hail to the King from Avenged Sevenfold came out. I'm not as familiar with the whole album. Very familiar with probably the two of the bigger songs off the album, Hail to the King and This Means War. They were everywhere. I admit that I've not been all the way through that album, but I'm sure it's probably good. Those guys are really good, so good stuff from them. Ended up going with almost both because for comedic effect and the one big song off this album. It kind of ties into our other podcast, which is our anime podcast, a song that was used on so many AMVs from 2013 probably to current. This is the album Save Rock and Roll from Fall Out Boy. It is my vault pick for the week. Listen to the whole album today. There were more songs on here that I recognized than I realized. Obviously, the big song that everybody knows is My Songs Know What You Did in the Dark, or Light 'Em Up, probably better known. It's just, for that style and that time period, it's good stuff. And again, it's been used on every AMV. If you look up that song title in any anime, you probably can find 36 AMVs on YouTube with that. But there's some other really good stuff on this album as well. The Phoenix, this is one I kind of forgot like what that song was, and then I heard like, oh, okay, I know that song. Alone Together, Where Did the Party Go? Missing You. It just, you had a song with featuring Elton John, Save Rock and Roll. It was the last track on the album. These guys are obviously very talented for what they do. They do a really good job at it. It's probably the extent of that type of music that I would want to listen to on a regular basis, because they're that type of rock. And I'm not even sure how you describe that type of rock that they do. There were bands that obviously took it a little farther that are just kind of hard to listen to. But I think these guys really did a good job. And one of the few mainstream pop rock acts of that era that I really enjoy their big hits. So before we get to some of the stuff I've already talked about, just your thoughts on Fall Out Boy here.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised when I looked at this album how few of like the big songs were on it.
Yeah.
I just assumed that like Centuries would be there and Immortal and all that. Like, no, those were on the next album. Like,
yeah.
I just kind of assumed all those songs came out about the same time. So that was really shocking. But obviously, My Songs Know What You Did in the Dark is just a ridiculously huge song. And honestly, Fall Out Boy is just a pop rock band. Like, it's weird because by this point in time, there are so few of them that get national attention and worldwide attention. But they're one of the last of a dying breed of just pop rock bands.
Yeah, and I think, how much you... Like, obviously, we spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about metal, and even if it's symphonic metal, but I think they're like a distant cousin when you look at like symphonic melodic metal and pop rock. Like they're not under the same tree, but they're definitely branches of the same tree. Like they're trying to do the same things, where you're taking something like rock or metal, but making it maybe more passable to the masses, where it has more of a melodic sound to it. And clearly that's what they were going for. They were writing hit songs, and they wrote some big ones. And like you said, the next album, which comes out in 2015, American Beauty, American Psycho, has some monster hits. And part of it was the singles off of that album started coming out in 2014. So the overlap of when the singles from this album and the singles for that album probably were almost back to back, which is probably why it felt like they were all coming out about the same time, because they were. It's just, kind of weird that, like Centuries came out in September of 2014. The album didn't release until January 16th of 2015. So, sure, they probably had probably was in a movie or was probably on something that caused them to release it early. But
I mean, I feel like it was everywhere.
It was everywhere. Every sporting event, everything, every AMV that, this was the AMV band of the 2010s for sure. But yeah,
take that, Linkin Park.
That's right. They had to boot them out of their throne. So definitely check those guys out. If you're of a certain age, I'm sure you definitely have checked these guys out. Let's just talk briefly about a couple of the albums I mentioned, then we'll get to some of the ones I missed.
Yeah, so Hail to the King, Avenged Sevenfold, that's an interesting album looking back on it, and I think they've even recently made comments about how it was kind of them trying to create a Black Album, essentially, where you wanted this like super accessible album that kind of showed what their influences were, and you can see it. I mean, songs like Shepherd of Fire, and certainly This Means War, just nothing but a Metallica song. Like This Means War is sad but true, essentially. You had Doing Time, which was a Guns N' Roses song, basically. Like, sounded dead on something Axl Rose would have done on Appetite for Destruction or like Use Your Illusion 1. You had Heretic, which sounded like Symphony of Destruction. Really cool stuff, and I enjoyed it for what it was, but it wasn't what I was looking for from Avenged Sevenfold.
Yeah.
I wanted, and I know this makes me kind of a bad fan. It kind of makes me that guy that wants Master of Puppets over and over again.
Right.
But the sound that Avenged Sevenfold had between City of Evil, the self-titled, and then Nightmare, that's kind of what I feel like their sound, that's what I want their sound to be. And that's selfish, but that's what I want.
I mean, you want them to realize, like, you guys are now big enough that you don't have to be anybody else. You can just be Avenged Sevenfold. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having influences and tribute to the bands that paved the way and influenced you growing up. But yeah, this felt like a Weird Al style parodies where it's like, we're going to do a style parody of this and a style parody of that. And it's like, that for a one-off, like, if you want to throw one of those on each album, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think, like you said, by that point, their fans thought, hey, you guys are Avenged. You're the biggest American rock metal act that's out here. Like, you should just do your thing. So
what you're doing works.
Yeah, but you're 100% right on that.
Yeah, you kind of wanted to see, like, there are certain elements to their sound that even if you're going to progress in other areas, I still wanted you to retain certain parts of that. And I think that maybe was what was missing on Hail to the King.
For sure.
Moving on to Super Collider from Megadeth. The album is fine. I think a lot of the critics of it kind of saw it. It probably started with 13, where they started veering a little bit closer to like the hard rock range again, less about just straight up speed or thrash metal. I feel like you kind of had something for everybody on the album. There were kind of the more hard rock tracks, but you also had like Kingmaker. That's great metal track. The song Dance in the Rain, I think, is tremendous as far as that, what you want from Megadeth. It has that kind of ever-evolving thing that kind of ends in this big crescendo, kind of like a Tornado of Souls. Like, it's not sonically like Tornado of Souls, but it's structurally like that. And I love when they do things like that. Featured David Draymond on it as well, which is pretty cool. That dude did some work this year as well in 2013. But yeah, that album, I think part of the problem was the title track came out and was very hard rocky.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's what people were looking for, especially because you had, you say System Has Failed maybe, but then certainly like United Abominations and Endgame were just classic Megadeth.
Yeah.
It was, and you kind of felt maybe they were getting away from that, but I liked it. Kingmaker, Dance in the Rain, Forget to Remember is a really good song. Blackest Crow, kind of this bluegrass thing going on. Forget to Remember is another really good one. But yeah, I'm not going to dislike any Megadeth album, probably.
Yeah, for sure. I think that covers the ones I mentioned. What else was on the list in 2013?
Yeah, so AFI released their 9th album, Burials, in 2013. still kind of them doing their thing, which is kind of parts of what they used to be mixed with this kind of indie rock thing, which still kind of works. Tracks like I Hope You Suffer, Deep Slow Panic, 17 Crimes, Heart Stops, Greater Than 84. If you're into AFI at all, you would have enjoyed it. Anthrax released their Anthems EP featuring... You kind of see where their influences lie. This featured cover songs from Rush, AC/DC, Boston, Journey, Cheap Trick, and Thin Lizzy. Also a chance for Belladonna to kind of flex his vocal range. So really cool stuff. You had Death Angel, The Dream Calls for Blood, another strong album from them. Gwar released Battle Maximus. The album kind of served as a tribute to Corey Smoot, the person behind Flatus Maximus from 2002 to 2011 who passed away. Sadly, it's also kind of remembered as the final album with Dave Brockie on it, as he would die in 2014. Kind of the end of an era for Gwar, it feels like. You had tracks like Madness at the Core of Time, They Swallowed the Sun, I Bone Snapper, The Triumph of the Pig Children. Really good album. I don't put it on the same level as like a Beyond Hell, but still good Gwar. You had Queensryche self-titled came out. The first album with Todd Latour. Really cool return to form for Queensryche. Definitely something if you're a fan of the classic sound of the band, you'll enjoy it. Tracks like Where Dreams Go to Die, Vindication, Don't Look Back, Open Road. Really strong stuff. A band that I didn't get into until just a few years back, probably about 5 years ago or so. The band Serenity released War of Ages. Really cool power metal band. Wings of Madness, The Art of War, Age of Glory, The Matricide, Legacy of Tutors. A lot of historical stuff going on in their music, but really awesome as well. Just a couple more. We got Stryper with No More Hell to Pay. Stryper rocks, whether people want to realize that or not. This is just a really good album. Songs like Revelation, No More Hell to Pay, cover of Jesus Is Just All Right, Legacy, Sympathy. Michael Sweet's a great vocalist, and the album rips. Mentioned David Draymond earlier. Trivium released Vengeance Falls in 2013, which was produced by David Draymond.
Oh.
That's the one that kind of got mixed reviews, I think, kind of because David Draymond was involved with it. I think people felt like his involvement led to what was more of like an even more accessible sound to Trivium, less Shogun, less Ascendancy, and kind of maybe drifting more toward like the Crusade. I think it's a great album. You have the title track, Vengeance Falls. You have Strife, To Believe, Villainy Thrives. Again, kind of like Megadeth. If it's a Trivium album, I'm probably going to enjoy it. And finally, you had the Winery Dogs with their self-titled supergroup featuring Mike Portnoy, Billy Sheehan, and Richie Kotzen. You like blues rock, you like with a little bit of prog thrown in, you're probably going to enjoy Winery Dogs.
Well, and that was it. Kind of tie everything up. You started the podcast talking about John Sykes, and that was it was revealed on the Metal Show in 2011 that he was forming a new band with Mike Portnoy that was called Bad Apple. But then he backed out of it. Sykes was replaced by Richie Kotzen. The group became the Winery Dogs, and there you go. So just kind of ties all that together.
I feel like Eddie Trunk was always looking for Sykes to do something new. I feel like he was a really big fan of his, and was always kind of stumping for him to be out there doing more work. But it's amazing how many connections you find the more you look into stuff. Yeah,
for sure. And I'm sure if you listen to Eddie Trunk's podcast on SiriusXM, I'm sure he'll, if he didn't already have an episode on Sykes, I'm sure he will.
Yeah.
If he has, make sure you check that out, because I'm sure he'll have a lot of really good things to say and kind of tie all that up. But that is going to wrap things up for our music podcast on this Sunday. And just a reminder that we're going to be back in just about 13 hours time. We'll be back with our news podcast. It'll be about 20 minutes of the news headlines you need to get your week started. Coming up, our Nerdcast news report coming up 9 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow morning, or if you're in somewhere where it's already Monday, later today on the Nerdcast Empire. Of course, big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast. Big thanks to Mike for all he does getting all this together. And a big thanks to you wherever you listen to our podcast. We really appreciate it. That is going to wrap things up. We'll talk to you again in about 13 hours' time with some news headlines coming your way on twitch.tv/NerdcastEmpire. But for Mike and the entire crew, I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.